Mr. Jackson was a well-respected teacher in their small town. He had always had a soft spot for his students, especially the ones who needed extra attention. But when he noticed that his best student, Emily, was not getting on the school bus with all the other children, he became worried. One day, he decided to follow her and was shocked when he saw her enter an old factory building. He parked his car a few blocks away from the factory and waited for Emily to enter. After a few minutes, he cautiously approached the building, his heart racing with each step. As he entered the dark and musty interior of the building, his mind was flooded with a sense of foreboding. The silence was oppressive, and the only sound was the muffled echo of his footsteps on the concrete floor. Then he saw her, Emily, sitting on the floor surrounded by her textbooks and notebooks. "Emily, what are you doing here?" Mr. Jackson asked, surprised. Emily looked up and smiled when she saw her teacher. "Oh, Mr. Jackson, I came here to do my homework. It's quiet here and I feel safe." "Why don't you go home?" he asked, his concern growing. "My mother's new boyfriend is very loud and aggressive," she replied. "I can't concentrate with all the yelling, and my father used to work here, so it's a familiar place to me." Mr. Jackson was heartbroken to hear this. He knew he had to do something to help Emily. He invited her to his home for dinner that night, and they talked about everything that was going on. Emily shared stories about her father, who had passed away a few years ago. She talked about how her mother had struggled to make ends meet, and how her new boyfriend was taking advantage of her love for him. Mr. Jackson listened intently and decided to take action. The next day, he arrived at Emily's house with the police. As they entered the house, they heard shouting coming from the living room. Emily's mother was crying, and her boyfriend was screaming at her. "Who the hell are you?" he yelled at Mr. Jackson as he entered. "I'm Emily's teacher, and I'm here to help," Mr. Jackson replied calmly. The boyfriend's face turned red with anger. "I don't need your help! Get the hell out of here!" The police stepped forward and demanded that the boyfriend calm down, but he continued to rant and rave, and eventually they arrested him for domestic abuse. Emily's mother was distraught, but relieved that her daughter and she were safe. Mr. Jackson promised to help them in any way he could, and he did. He helped them with the household chores, took Emily shopping for new clothes, and even offered to pay for a tutor to help her catch up with her studies. Over time, Emily and her mother began to trust Mr. Jackson more and more. He became like a father figure to Emily, and she felt safe and protected with him around. Her grades improved, and she started to come out of her shell, making new friends at school. One day, as they sat down to dinner together, Emily's mother looked at Mr. Jackson with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for everything," she said. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Mr. Jackson smiled and put his hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to thank me. It's my pleasure to help you and Emily. You both mean a lot to me." Emily smiled and hugged her teacher. "I love you, Mr. Jackson. You're the best." Mr. Jackson hugged her back, feeling a warmth in his heart. "I love you too, Emily. You're like a daughter to me." As Mr. Jackson walked out of the house, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. He had made a difference in Emily's life, and that was all that mattered to him. However, the more he thought about it, the more he realized that there was a lesson to be learned from this experience. He couldn't help but wonder how many other children were struggling with similar situations at home. He knew that Emily was lucky to have him as a teacher, but what about those who didn't have anyone to turn to? Mr. Jackson made a promise to himself that he would be more vigilant in the future. He would keep an eye out for any signs of trouble and offer help wherever he could. He realized that being a teacher was not just about teaching subjects. It was about shaping young minds and making a difference in their lives. Over the next few weeks, Mr. Jackson started to notice things that he might have missed before. He saw children who looked sad and lost, children who seemed to be struggling with something, and he didn't hesitate to offer help. He would talk to them, listen to their problems, and offer advice whenever he could. Mr. Jackson had become more than just a teacher. He was a mentor, a guide, and a friend to his students. He had learned that it was important to be there for his students, not just academically, but emotionally as well. He had learned that sometimes all it took was a little bit of kindness to make a big difference in someone's life.